So, a lot of people are talking about what Jim Lee said about the difference between Western comics and manga, and how manga is selling really well compared to Western comics, and he says that Western comics is missing something, and that they aren't able to achieve the same flavor. He says, what is missing in Western comics, and why aren't they able to achieve the same flavor? And of course, this has sparked a debate about the differences between Western comics and manga, which I believe was a debate for a long time, way before Jim Lee said these comments, but it is now taken on a whole new life. And now we are just going around in circles about how manga is selling really well in the West, and that comics aren't as successful as manga. And most of these reasons about why manga is selling better than comics are pretty valid, but there is one reason that I feel like most people aren't talking about enough for why manga is able to West, sell better than Western comics. And I think the main reason, the one big reason that manga is able to sell way better than comics, and that manga has a bigger advantage, is, of course, the art of adaptation. That is being anime. And anime, at the end of the day, is what really like sells manga. Anime is what sells manga. You know, the anime sells the manga, and the manga sells the anime. And I think that is the one big advantage that manga has over comics that I think Western comics needs in order to compete with manga or achieve the same level of respect for comics. And of course, this is like a concept from way back then. A concept from way back then is that you have like a movie, you have a show, you have an animated series, and it gets really popular, and then it sells the original source material, whether it's comics or novels or even video games. And the reason why there is hype for manga and how manga keeps selling is because an anime is made, and the anime gets popular, and there is a gap between like the next seasons, and that is where the manga gets to start gaining acceptance. That is where the manga starts to gain a reputation, and because people don't want to wait for like a year or so, a year or two, so they go to the manga and read the next chapters, and that is the whole market. Once once they catch up on the manga, they then get to experience the next seasons and see them animated, and it's that type of symbiotic relationship, you could say, where you read the manga to catch up on the story, and you watch the anime to see how the story is adapted. And of course, you know, once there's an anime, the anime brings and people discover new manga because of anime. So it's a somebody it's like a it's like a symbiotic relationship, and it works really well and doesn't seem to stop anytime soon. But over here in the West, it's a little complicated, especially for Western comics. Since the big two are like the dominators of Western comics, it's really complicated and it isn't as straightforward as like manga or even novels because you have, so many versions, so many continuities, and it's really complicated to adapt Marvel or DC comics for the most part. And of course, there's a whole other debate for the independent comics that are more straightforward and don't rely on complicated continuity. So, what does comics need in order to sell the same way as manga? Is, well, I think it's obvious. It's adaptation. We could use, comics could use more adaptations. Kind of like the it's kind of like the Harry Potter phenomenon, you know? And I think this is more common in novels where during like the 2000s and 2010s, where every movie was made about some popular fantasy novel, and of course the movie would sell the fantasy novel and the fantasy novels would sell the movies. So like Harry Potter, and Harry Potter was able to sell books and the books were able to sell the movies. So it's like the Harry Potter phenomenon. I think comics could use something like that, where you have the comic fans that would watch the show to see how the story is adapted, and you have the movie or show adaptation that would help people discover the comic, and that would make the new people want to read the comic. And I think that is what comics needs in order to sell like manga. It is very complicated compared to Marvel or DC, but with the independent comics, I think it could work really well. And I think you kind of see this with shows like Invincible and The Walking Dead. Although I think The Walking Dead is a little more complicated because based on what I heard, The Walking Dead at some points goes on a different direction, but I think if there was a show or animated series that adapts the Walking Dead comic one for one, it would bring up new hype and I guess restore popularity in some case. And there is the point about where Jim Lee said that manga is a lot more diverse and isn't just superhero stories. And I think that does apply where comics could adapt more stories that aren't just superhero. And if there were more adaptations, whether it's movies, shows, cartoons, whatever, more adaptations about these diverse comics that aren't superhero stories, then it would bring more light to these comic stories that are a variety of genres, and it would prove to the mainstream audience that comics can be told throughout many types of stories and many types of genres. So I think he So I think he is right that comic adaptations could be more diverse because there are even some anime that aren't just specifically shonen or one type of genre. So I think at the end of the day, while there are a lot more reasons why, like, for why manga sells more than comics, I think one of the biggest reasons is adaptation. And adaptation is something that brings new life to a work of art. And an adaptation is something that brings new life to a story. And if comics had something like that, then I think more people would appreciate the medium and respect it the same way that people respect manga as not just kids' entertainment, but as as a different medium of storytelling, or as literature, as Jim Lee says. Not look down on it. And I think this might be possible and the only other company that could probably achieve this is maybe Image. So while Marvel and DC might have a difficult time achieving this because their stories rely on an established building continuity, I think the one company that could achieve something like this phenomenon is maybe Image or some other independent companies that tell many types of stories. I think there is a market for a type of shonen jump, maybe, that publishes many types of stories and brings some light for a future adaptation, whether it's cartoons, movies, whichever. And I think hype is what really matters in bringing a whole new life and excitement for these types of comic stories, which is what happened with Invincible and how Invincible was able to bring a whole new life of popularity even after the Invincible story ended a long time ago because of the cartoon series. And we kind of did get this whole new life, hype, and popularity during the phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And while they weren't exactly adapting, they were using popular Marvel stories like Civil War, The Winter Soldier, and many others. A whole there was a whole hype about how they would use the Infinity Gauntlet story, since that was what it was leading to. And there was a time when DC would adapt some of their popular stories as animated movies, and the comic readers were happy to see the comic adapted into a movie. And of course, these animated movies, which in some ways appeal to normies or casual fans, would help those types of fans discover new popular comic stories. So like I said, the the art the art of adaptation is somewhat of a symbiotic relationship. and how comics could sell the adaptation, and the adaptation, like whichever, could sell the comics or the original source material. And you could apply this to many other types of arts like comics, video games, so on. So, that is all I got for today. I did go on a bit of a ramble, but it's pretty interesting about how this discussion will always go on, because comics and manga are pretty similar forms of art, and both of them have the potential to be something special. But anyway, that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching, and until then, love and peace.